What's the most unprofessional thing a doctor said to you? Took a home pregnancy test but went to a walk-in clinic to confirm. I was only 18. The doctor, whom I'd never met before, walked in and stuck a pH strip in my face on the way to her seat, asking if I knew what that means. Casually informed me, "Yep, you're pregnant." First question was whether or not I went to church. I was still attending my mom's church out of latent obligation, so I said yes, and got a lecture on how my parents wouldn't like it at first, but between them and God, I'd get through it. She then quickly gave me a bunch of prenatal vitamin information while my boyfriend and I sat there in shock. We were halfway out the door, 1 foot in the waiting room full of people, when she stopped us and thanked us for not asking her about abortion. We were way too young. We got that abortion a few weeks later. Had blood taken for a mono screening as I had been ill for months. Lymph nodes were popping out of my neck. Fatigue. General weak immune system. I knew it was mono. My usual doctor knew it was mono, but when my tests came in they gave the results to his new to the practice daughter to present to me. She looked them over, looked at me with big eyes and said, "According to what I see here, you probably have leukemia." Shocked, I asked if they tested for mono and wanted to see the results. She handed them to me and lo and behold, they did not screen for mono. I got a second blood test done at another clinic and wow, it was mono. Could never believe how a doctor would jump to cancer right off the bat without even thinking of any other results. Not a doctor but a paramedic told me after checking for signs of life on my mother. They ask loads of questions when it's a sudden death, and one question was she a drinker? I respond no, and his words, which still upset me to this day 6 years later, "She looks like a drinker. My mum just died. I was the one to find her. She actually died of a brain hemorrhage and not because of alcohol like he was clearly assuming." WTF. I'm sorry you had to experience that. I was scolded by my grandmother's doctor because my grandmother was stubborn with the hospital staff and wandered around too much during the night. It was a pretty harsh scolding too, about something that I couldn't control at all. I apologized, told her I spoke to my grandma about it, and will again, but the doctor just continued and took out all her frustrations on me, about what a bad patient my grandma was. I broke down crying. I had moved to another continent to take care of my dying grandmother, had no friends or close family nearby, had a huge language barrier to deal with, the culture was unfamiliar to me, and I was pretty young at the time too. It was such an overall helpless situation, that scolding me for something I couldn't even control set me over the edge. The doctor knew the circumstances too, but didn't give a crap. That is awful. I'm really sorry. You sound like such a kind-hearted person too. What a lovely thing you did for your grandmother. Doctor was doing a pap smear and he said whoa at one point while the speculum was in. I never did find out why, but I'm assuming he was just amazed by my awesome vagina. I was told I have a cute little uterus. When I got pregnant for the first time I had a miscarriage. When the bleeding started my husband and I rushed to the hospital. I look a lot younger than I actually am. At the time I was 24 and looked maybe 16. The nurses were kind and did all tests and ultrasounds. They told me the doctor would come in shortly to let us know what's up. So we waited forever and then we hear the doctor in the hall flirting with the nurses, which is fine. Whatever, but then he made a joke and then walked into my room laughing, looks at my chart and goes, "Well, good news is you aren't pregnant anymore." I bust out in tears and his smirk faded from his face and he goes, "Oh, you wanted the baby? I assumed because you are a teenager that you didn't want it." My husband looks him dead in the eye and tells him that I'm 24 and we have been married for 2 years and we did want a baby. So then the doctor begins backpedaling and tells me that everything else looks fine and in time we could try again. I got up, called lemon butthole, then went home and cried on the couch for 2 days. That is absolutely horrific. I'm sorry you were both treated so awfully. Oh, you actually have a lump. I assumed you were lying. The specialist my doctor referred me to. My dentist when I was little once told me that if I didn't stop crying, he would give me something to cry about. Hey, my dentist did the same thing when I was 7. Then he really did give me something to cry about. I have Tourette syndrome, meaning I make involuntary movements and noises called tics, so I can look pretty weird at times. It started when I was 4, recently diagnosed, Highly insecure 12-year-old me was at the doctor's for an unrelated health concern when I was told, people won't want to be your friend if you're doing that all the time. They'll think you're weird, referring to a facial tic. Ex-girlfriend said something along the same lines, saying that it was the reason for the breakup. So yeah, haven't dated in years because of it. A male general practitioner, not an OB-GYN, tried to tell me I didn't have any kind of lady problem because crippling period pain is normal. When I finally nagged a referral out of him to see a specialist, he just about threw it at me and told me to enjoy wasting my money. 6 months and 1 surgery later, they found endometriosis, PCOS, a blocked fallopian tube, and that I have a retroverted uterus. I filed a complaint about his dickish behavior that if I'd gone with it could have led to the problems getting significantly worse. Why do you want an STD screening? Are you a prostitute? Asked me what I did for work. Told him bartender. He then asks if I ever thought about getting a real job. You're South Asian. You don't need sunblock. My husband got the opposite. He's Japanese, but because I'm white as the driven snow, he's got the sun care habits of an albino. His dermatologist is in love with him. I am a professional actress singer and was having major vocal problems. I went to an ent and he kept referring to me as a professional and doing air quotes and saying it in the worst tone ever. I was about to open a show and asked if there was any sort of steroid he could give me to just help me get through the next 8 shows. And he says, "Oh nope, you're on your own. I'm not going to do that." I literally left his office in tears after he gave me awful news and then told me there was nothing he could do. Saw another ent the next day and he couldn't believe the other doctor wouldn't give me something to help me out. Probably bitter that he didn't follow his acting singing dreams. I was around 12 years old and I was getting a physical. The nurse told me I had diabetes and I was so freaked out about it I started to cry. Turns out, the nurse was wrong and I didn't test positive for diabetes when I came back to test for it. She just misdiagnosed me on the spot. The next year, I was getting another physical at the same place when a different nurse laughed at me and said, "Oh, it's you. Are you going to cry again this time?" I remember feeling really embarrassed for getting emotional, until I realized that the nurse was an butthole for making fun of a patient. Psychiatrist said that I should sort out my anxiety by taking a gap year in Australia. He was Australian. We were in Scotland. His notes said I was attention seeking and flirting with him. Heck no, I was not. Turned out I had Asperger's. A doctor told me I was too young to be having the kind of pain I was describing after an auto wreck. A doctor told my mom she was overweight because survival mode. Pregnant with my firstborn and had to see a specialist for an additional ultrasound. Doctor found out I wasn't married yet and was a complete stong about how unmarried people shouldn't have kids. Also tried to convince me to go to a state that allowed later term abortions only because of my marital status, not because there was anything wrong with the baby. My primary doctor was off for a month and my sinuses were killing me and I felt like I was getting a sinus infection. I went to an urgent care and spoke to the doctor, or she might have been a PA, and told her that I think I was getting a sinus infection and if I am I would like to get on top of it before it gets bad. She asked why I thought it was happening and I gave her my symptoms: runny nose, pain in sinuses, waking up with crusty pink eyes, headaches, etc. And she looked at me and yelled at me that there is nothing wrong with me and I can't just come in there looking for antibiotics, which I never said once. And how could I diagnose myself? And then she wrote me a prescription for Augmentin and told me she hopes it gives me C. diff and I end up in the hospital and that will show me what it's like to be sick. Ugh, I think some doctors forget we actually live in our bodies all day, every day. We know what's normal. We know how things feel if it's reoccurring. I just got off a round of antibiotics for a sinus infection. This time of year is terrible where I live for sinus issues. My very pregnant wife told her OB about some ache or pain and she said, "You know what I'm going to do about it? Not a darn thing." She was normally nice but that day she was a nasty bee. I'm in the hospital with my mom and my husband. Mom has a bad kidney stone and severe infection. A doc keeps making creep eyes at me and says you're preening a lot. I was moving my hair out of my face because I forgot a ponytail holder. Are you making this up? I was 4 years old and had septic arthritis in my hip. I lost half the cartilage in my hip and was in a wheelchair for 2 years. At the time that this was said, my temperature was over 40 C and I should have been on an IV drip and had my pelvis in traction. After 10 days the doctor sent me home with a Zimmer frame. My parents should have sued the heck out of him. Doctor I thankfully only saw once, asked what medication I was on. I'm on 3 different prescriptions to treat my anxiety and depression. And I answered thus. He proceeds to lecture me on how the drugs won't cure my mental illness and I have to make things right in my soul for about 15 minutes. Bro, I didn't ask your opinion about my mental health. I'm here so you can treat my carpal tunnel. My uncle's doctor was doing a prostate exam and asked if he was gay. He also found out my uncle was First Nations and asked him if he drank a lot of alcohol. Soy uncle said number. Do you eat a lot of curry? The doctor was from India. Bless. Stay proud of your uncle. OP. I was hospitalized for aspiration pneumonia post tonsillectomy. I was in the hospital for 4 days. I had a follow-up with my ex-GP a week after I was discharged. First of all, the guy is super short and rude and interrupts when I'm talking about my symptoms etc. Then he reviews a blood work from the day I was discharged and says, now has anyone told you there is something wrong with your liver? I was recovering from a potentially life-threatening complication and had been on IV antibiotics nearly non-stop for 4 days. What he was referring to was that one of my liver enzymes was elevated. There are a million things that can cause that to happen. One of those things is gallstones. I had no symptoms but he was convinced that was it and referred me to get an ultrasound. You know what else elevates that enzyme? The class of antibiotics I had been taking. I turned down the ultrasound and requested blood work instead to see if the value had returned to normal after being off antibiotics for several days. It had. Also at the end of the appointment I had to ask him to listen to my lungs because he wasn't going to, when I had just been hospitalized for serious pneumonia. So when I asked him to listen to my lungs to see if they were still clearing up, he said, well, I will, but only because you think it matters. It won't make a difference to me. I was completely dumbfounded and angry. I called the clinic the next day and switched providers. You're too young to make that decision. I'm 25, child-free by choice. I've had cervical cancer, PMDD, ovarian cysts, and I am genetically disabled, but I'm too young to get a hysterectomy. Yet my 25-year-old friend got hers from the same gyno without question because she's got 2 children. I was discriminated against because I don't have children and don't want them. Well, she's probably got a bunch of tumors in her head. He almost said fricking head, I swear to God. When I broke my ankle and had to have 2 surgeries and screws plates put into it, I couldn't sleep because of the pain. So I go to my doctor and tell him I desperately need something. I'm like 17, so I'm not after pain pills or an addict, and he tells me to quit whining. I'm a healthy girl and I'll live. It pissed me off so much. Asked me whether or not I believed in Jesus before we did my pap smear. Told me that Christianity was the one true religion before handing over my antidepressants. I think that's illegal. I was told I needed to have my mouth wired shut for 3 months when I was 12. I started to cry. The surgeon told me not to be such a wimp. Got a second opinion. No surgery. I'm fine now. Butthole. Due to toe walking, doctors wanted to bind my feet for a span of 3 to 4 months when I was 9. I'd have to spend the entire summer vacation and the beginning of the new school year in a wheelchair to prevent me from ever being able to stand on my toes again. Sometimes docs blow things way out of proportion with the cure worse than the symptom. A couple of summers ago I started getting pretty bad acne with little rhyme or reason. At age 19/20 with no previous acne in my teens. When at a general appointment with my doctor last year I asked her if there is anything we could do about it. She asked about my face washing regimen and asked if I wash off makeup at the end of the day. Generally I used to be bad at always washing my makeup off, but this appointment was at the end of last summer where I had worn makeup maybe 3 times all summer, yet I still had a chin strap full of acne. Before she could give me any time to provide context that I had hardly worn makeup all summer, she said, "Well, no wonder you have acne. You don't wash your makeup off at night." I left the appointment in tears and I'm still struggling with acne, despite changing my face washing regimen and religiously taking care of my skin. And now a year later I have full-blown cystic acne, the kind that hurts and has left some scars. I'm finally seeing a different dermatologist next week to hopefully get some real answers and help, but I've never felt so invalidated by a medical professional who's supposed to be helpful and supportive. You might have them check for a staph infection. My brother-in-law had acne well into his 30s and couldn't do anything for it. Finally his doc figured out he'd picked up a staph infection back in high school due to other medical issues he'd had. Couple weeks on antibiotics and he's been acne-free since. But why do you need therapy? I've been depressed for 20 years and the pills were not working. I freaking hate her so much. I was such an angry teen, not your normal teenager but one who had been through so much horrible things no child should have. Instead of being sad I was angry and about to hurt myself or others. Luckily for me I knew to get help. The doctor said to me, you don't seem like an angry person. Yeah, because a 5'1" chick can be nothing but chirpy. My doctor is a good guy, but he has clown posters all over his office. Not for children, but like sophisticated clown posters he bought in Paris. He keeps trying to hook me up with his hot Vietnamese assistant. Like she'll give me a free massage, and he'll tell me to slip her a few bucks for a special treat. After she found love, he is now trying to hook me up with his assistant hot Vietnamese sister. Not sure if he is like their pimp or something. Where the heck are you people finding these doctors? A doc was getting informed consent from my 20-something-year-old patient for a below-the-knee amputation following a traumatic car accident. He explained it using the terms like guillotine and showed not an ounce of empathy. The patient burst into tears, and the family sat in shocked silence. Needless to say, I wrote the doctor up. Still sticks with me. I had been extremely dizzy for several days. When it progressed to the point when I couldn't walk unassisted I went to the ER. When the doctor examined me she did some neurological tests. I did poorly on some of them. She then accused me of not really trying since I had no real reason to do poorly and told me that she would come back in a few minutes. When she came back I still could not successfully complete the tests. She said that she couldn't help me since I wanted to be sick. I went to a different ER and the doctor there looked at my ears. She diagnosed me with a viral infection that had spread from my ear to one of my cranial nerves. Guess which part of me the first doctor hadn't bothered to look at? This is one of the reasons that I only disclose my mental health history after a doctor has shown that they won't automatically attribute my physical health problems to malingering or psychosymptomatic effects. Several other doctors have done similar things but this was the only one who outright accused me of faking it. I was exploring new birth control options with my doctor. His suggestion: why don't you just use the pull-out method? You are after all married. It worked for me and my wife for a while. He has 3 kids. Switched my doctor real fast after that. For a while, I see he didn't learn about confirmation bias in med school. After asking a question about my birth control, my doctor told me that it would be okay if it failed because I was married. This was after I had just talked to her about the toll grad school was taking on me mentally, and how I was worried about finding a job. But, don't worry, I'm married so I'm totally okay to have a baby. You'd be pretty if you weren't so fat, yeep. From a doc. You're a hypochondriac. This was said for 6 months of in and out visits. The pain wasn't constant. Weirdly it was every night at about 3 AM. Lasted for an hour each and was intense. Cold sweat and rocking on the floor kind of agony. Finally gave up and went private just to get a scan. Had a 10cm cyst growing on my left ovary. Scared of my GP now. I could tell you, but you can just look online. Okay Reddit, why is my spleen bleeding? Cancer. It's always cancer. I went to a doctor seeking help with weight loss. He actually said, we know everyone can lose weight because there were no fat people at Auschwitz. For such an undeniably awful guy, Hitler apparently did know how to run a weight loss program. He also doesn't get enough credit for killing Hitler. When my son was born several were in the room due to him being a month premature. They are standing there evaluating him and one of them says, oh, he has the cutest nipples ever. Thank you. Did you reply with you should see mine? Had been ill for ages, had to quit work as I was feeling so unwell. Loads of tests all normal. Are you sure you're not just bored? Eventually diagnosed with CFS, IBS and endometriosis. Made the mistake of unknowingly choosing a Seventh-day Adventist doctor once. There were religious pamphlets in the examination rooms. Every time I went in I got lectured about how I should be vegan and that I need to get spiritually healthy if I want to be physically healthy. I'm like, lady, I just need my inhaler prescription renewed. Needless to say, I chose a new doctor soon after. Why was I planning on having sex if I wasn't married, and how would my father feel about my choices? I was 22 at the time. You bet I filed a formal complaint against him. Looked at the tongue depressors and said, AWW man, someone ate all my popsicles. That's kind of awesome and would probably make me smile. Purple bananas, like for good luck. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video.